We are talking the movie Herd, and this is directed by Stephen Pierce, who also co-wrote this movie. And this, on its surface, you could say is a zombie apocalypse movie, and we've seen plenty of them. However, this movie has some hidden depths, let me just tell you. Let me give you a brief plot synopsis, and then we'll kind of have a little bit more of a deep dive into it. So the plot follows two women, essentially, who are a couple, Alex and Jamie. And they are a couple who are going through some difficulties. So they decide that they're going to go on this kind of camping trip to try and kind of work out their relationship and work out their differences, etc. Now, at the beginning of this kind of trip, we do see some kind of radio reports where there is apparently some kind of virus which is affecting people. But it's kind of like they just kind of poo-poo it and go on their kind of trip. However, whilst they're on this trip, one of the women has a boating accident and breaks her leg. So now these women are trying to kind of find help, and they stumble across two kind of warring militias in the kind of the full-on zombie apocalypse at this point, at least within this kind of particular area. So we have these two militias, each of whom are vying for kind of resources and kind of doing what they feel is best. And these two women kind of get caught up in that struggle between these two militias. All the while, you have these kind of zombies that seem to be very grotesque, very kind of vicious and things like that. And of course, these women have ideas about what they want to do and what they feel is best in their kind of situation, which might not be the same as either of these kind of two militias. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what I liked about Herd. So let's talk about the title first of all. Herd, I thought that's quite a clever title. Because of course you can say it refers to a herd of zombies, and that might well be true. But it also has other meanings here. This movie is as much about the kind of the human condition, so to speak. And I know some of you might roll your eyes when I say that about a horror movie with kind of like layers and things, but you know, herd also refers to how people are following the herd. They're following kind of what people are, like leaders are saying to them, what they see in the media, what they kind of, they believe through kind of just the populace around them and things like this. And, you know, how people are just kind of influenced. And that's a lot of what the movie's actually kind of about. But it doesn't, I think it works it in pretty well and quite organically, I have to say. And you know, you're left wondering a lot of the time which is the kind of the best course of action for any character at any particular time. So let me go into a little bit more detail about what I liked, and we'll kind of touch upon that again as we kind of go through this review. Now, the one thing that struck me initially about this film was its quite high production value. Now on this channel, if you've watched any of my videos any time, you'll know that we review a lot of low budget movies, and I've seen plenty of lower budget zombie films. So you know, and I can appreciate a low budget B movie and a low budget zombie B movie. But I have to say, whilst watching this one, I was impressed with just the general presentation of this film. This movie feels like it's had time and effort put behind it. I feel the story is quite well thought out and quite well kind of put together. There I have a few issues, but we'll come on to that. But for the most part, this movie felt like it has had care and effort put behind it, both in its storytelling but also the technical elements here. I thought the cinematography was very strong. The general kind of technical ability just gives it this kind of like nice polished feel where you feel like this is a mediumly high budgeted movie, at least it appears to be, because the quality of what you're seeing on screen in regards to its technical aspects is solid. It's a solidly put together film. You know, great cinematography, good lighting, audio. The effects are pretty good, and like we'll come on to the zombies again in a little bit. But also the acting, I think, is very strong from the characters. But what I really liked about the characters was the way they are written. Now, one of the other things that struck me about this film was the moral complexity of pretty much everyone within this film. Because at any one time, you're kind of judging these characters that are presented to us, and we can only obviously base it on what the film shows us, and it's asking us to make moral judgments about, you know, how we can view certain characters. But but I think the movie does a good job here of making some very kind of like morally grey areas. For example, there's characters that we learn have done some despicable things, but have also done good things and helped people in some way. Jamie's father is a good example of this, but there's other characters to a certain degree as well that have this kind of moral complexity where, you know, in one hand they seem quite despicable, but you'll see them kind of be quite nice in certain aspects as well. So it gives us a good, you know, a good idea that people aren't good or bad, they're just kind of morally complex, and some might weigh heavier on one side. Even our protagonists, I feel, at one point in the movie do something, you know, with the information that they've got to hand, which is pretty selfish, I have to say. So even our protagonists, who we are following, our point of view characters, I feel, are somewhat morally questionable, and the movie calls them out on it, which I kind of quite enjoyed. So I thought the characterization here was very strong. And I'm not going to go through every example, but even throughout the movie there's other aspects as well where I feel like, because they're in this kind of like more of a kind of deep south kind of area, you know, one of the women is kind of a little bit guarded about hiding their kind of, obviously their interest in each other, shall we say, whilst the other one is a bit like, you're kind of worrying too much about it. Things like that, they seem perfectly fine, and you know what will happen. We have to watch the film. So let's talk about the zombies. Okay, so this is a film to me that makes zombies scary again, at least to a point. I have to say the zombies are treated here, because they're not in the forefront all the time. This movie's less about the zombies, so to speak, more about the kind of the world around it. And I think the zombies are treated very, very interestingly. And for one aspect, I think they do seem quite threatening because, you know, this is at the beginning of a zombie outbreak, so not a lot of people really understand about what's kind of happening and stuff. And the zombies are very grotesque, full of like huge green pustules and things like this. They look very kind of gross. And they seem genuinely kind of dangerous, and it does give you that kind of like that, a little bit of a fear factor in regards to, you know, who's going to get infected, who's going to get attacked by these kind of zombies. So I thought the movie did a good job of actually making zombies, which, let's be honest, are a tried and tested commodity in the horror element at this point, actually kind of quite scary. But here's another thing that this movie does, and I'm going to be vague here. The movie, if you've seen zombie films at any time, you'll see there's certain zombie films that have kind of done something with zombie lore which is a little bit different. So, for example, Return of the Living Dead, for example, popularised zombies eating brains. Night of the Living Dead popularised that kind of what's known as the Romero-style zombie. And then we had the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which kind of popularised fast-moving zombies, although it didn't introduce that, to be fair. So this movie, I think, does a great job on a new twist on this kind of, on a zombie mythos, a new and interesting twist on the zombie. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I thought, wow, that's really interesting. That is something quite different to what we've seen before, but still not kind of moving too much away from what you would expect from a zombie. But it introduces something, actually a couple of things really, that I think, wow, that's actually an interesting idea. So I quite enjoyed that. And the movie being, as we have a couple of different militias, we do get a couple of kind of face-offs and action sequences, more kind of like gunplay and stuff. So it has an action element to it as well. Okay, so let's talk about what I think didn't work as much. So I just want to go back to what I've just said about this, introducing this new element that adds a new dimension to the tried and tested, you know, rules of zombie cinema. However, I don't think they go far enough with it. In fact, not nearly enough. We get a couple of things that are introduced, and then it's kind of not much is done with it. It's the best way I would describe it. And I think, man, you've introduced something which is a really different idea for a zombie film, and then you've just kind of left it there in the ether, which I think... I mean, I understand it's played this hand late in the film. And I know it was a kind of a fairly good twist to a degree. But I wanted to see a bit more of a deep dive, a bit more of an exploration about this new and original idea that it introduces to what otherwise is a very kind of like stale genre. And I was like, oh, that seems like a missed opportunity, if we're being completely honest. So I thought, you know, I loved the idea of what they introduced, but, you know, I was a little disappointed that it's only really introduced as a kind of a moment to go, oh my God, that's kind of quite shocking, and then it just kind of leaves there. So that was a little disappointing. I have to say as well, the end of the movie, I think it's somewhat kind of satisfying, but I think it maybe went on for a little long, just the end of the movie. And the other thing I would say, we have our two kind of militias, and I feel we get a good sense of one of the militias, but the other kind of side, who seem much more sort of militaristic, but we're led to believe that they're not the government, they're just the militia. I felt we didn't get any idea of really who they were. And it was kind of like, well, I don't understand why they clearly have more professional equipment, but they're just another militia. And I didn't really feel like, and he needed a little bit more explanation about who they were and why they can't kind of coexist and things like that. It's just, again, it just left a little bit too much kind of on the table, I think, where it could have been a little tighter in regards to maybe some of the script here. And I should say, there's a decision here which to make our main characters have some choices that make them seem somewhat selfish, which you might find might kind of make you dislike them to a certain degree. That's obviously a choice that was made, and I actually like that. But I do feel the knock-on effect is, you know, there's a choice that is made that makes them feel a little selfish, to be honest. And the movie does have a couple of kind of cliches, if we're being completely honest. Yes, we've all got that kind of like zombie film where we have someone that's bitten that is kind of like doesn't tell anyone and kind of is trying to just go unnoticed, when you clearly kind of know where it's gonna go ultimately, or at least you think you do. So, you know, yeah, there's kind of that. So overall, I have to say though, the positives for me far outweigh the negatives, and I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and it was a refreshing breath of fresh air in this kind of the zombie genre, I have to say, or it should I say a refreshing rotting stench of flesh. But there you go. I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. I would have liked to have seen more, a little bit more explanation. I think maybe it's a little bit too talky for some. Maybe it could have had a little bit more zombies in the forefront in certain degrees, but for what it was, I really enjoyed it. I love the character work here. It's big points for that for me. So it's a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.